In Britain today, marriage has lost its status. Young people, particularly, no longer seem to get the point in marriage, and they view it as completely unviable and without point anyway. We're losing the idea that marriage is just something normal that people do and always have done in various cultures throughout history and throughout time. Britons no longer understand what marriage is, and in 2019, marriage rates are at their lowest since records began in 1862. So marriage is in a dire place in this country. And I think first and foremost, part of the problem is that people just don't really understand what the institution really is. And so this episode, I'm going to try and enlighten you as best as I can about what marriage is. So marriage is a union between a man and a woman. It's a partnership for life with the intended aim of benefiting both partners in the marriage. It's intended as a stable union between those partners so that they can ride the rocky seas of life and have an institution that they can fall back on when things get tough, as mutual support between a husband and a wife strengthens each other and makes it more likely that you'll be able to traverse difficult territories and the dangers that life can throw at you at any time. It's also a space within which children can be raised safely and securely. They can be nurtured in this environment, which is like a rock to them, because the husband and wife have built a strong environment, and the children can come into the world and be nurtured and strengthened and in a safe environment so that they learn everything they need to know before they become adults and are therefore ready to go out into this dangerous world themselves and to survive within it. Marriage and families are the first building block of a town, village, a city, even a country. Because what all of those things are at their very basis, families coming together to form social bodies and to have social interactions that move towards a goal that is in the interest of everybody. So that might be to labor and cooperate together to create food, to trade, but even just to fulfill the necessaries of social interaction. At the base of this family structure is also motherhood. All of us came from the womb of our mother, and we wouldn't be in the world if it was not for our mother, because they nurture us in the womb. And then when we are born and defenseless and in need of support from a mother, they rear us in life until we are able to go on our own 2 feet and into adulthood. So mothers sacrifice a large part of their lives to birth and rear us as people and to protect the unique individual that will be formed by their efforts. And so motherhood takes a special and unique place in human life as basically the cradle of creation. Without mothers, our society dies because it simply does not reproduce itself. Motherhood is therefore one of the most valuable and noble vocations you can embark upon in this life, and it can bring with it a level of fulfillment that people don't have now and crave hugely. We all, on some level, understand the need and the desire for good mothers in this world, nurturing mothers. And similarly, if you're a man and you claim to be supportive of women, it is your duty to forego your many opportunities for several partners and to dedicate yourself to one woman whom you love and to support her for life in this process of birthing and rearing the next generation of people who will be unique and who are unique creations in this world. It is your duty to help the woman in the dangerous and difficult experiences of life, to create this safe and secure bedrock from which children can be nurtured and grow into decent human beings capable of operating within our society. This is ultimately why marriage is important, because it signifies to the outside world and to people in your local community that this is what you and another person are embarking upon. You have chosen to stick together for life and make a huge sacrifice together for the greater good, which is the continuation of our species and the continuation of your community and culture. It's simultaneously then a challenge, but also a noble goal, and one that you could dedicate your life towards. If you're looking in this world for meaning and you're without it, something like marriage is somewhere to locate that meaning and to find a more noble answer to what you're looking for in this life. And part of the reason why marriage is falling apart in this country is because what I've just explained, people just don't understand. They've not been told it in that way. But it's also for another reason, and that's we now live in a culture that has decided that the individual should just be able to do as they please. And what's included within this is the idea that they should just be able to exit the marriage bond at any moment, as though it was just a contract that was drawn up for their temporary fulfillment and their temporary betterment, and that as soon as it comes to the end of its expiry date, then it can just be torn up and the person can leave as though nothing had ever happened. So people are effectively going into marriages, those who still do, without really understanding what it is, but they're also going into it with one foot already out of the door, because as soon as that marriage becomes a burden to them, which it will, because it's a challenge, they're ready to just cut the tie and run. One of the results of this, perhaps an unintended consequence, is that in the new culture where sexual attraction or emotion is the contributor, is seen as the motor behind why one should stay in a relationship, the consequence of this is that there isn't really any motives to stay in a marriage. It becomes incredibly costly to be in a marriage because at any one time, the other person could just cut and run and take most of your property and wealth with them. So you could end up in a situation where you're alone again, and most of your assets that you spent your life to build are taken away from you. And so you can't really trust to enter into a marriage with another person. And so honestly, in our current culture, if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, it kind of makes sense not to want to get married, because of the emotional and material cost that will come to you if it fails, which it probably will, because you're both going into it without understanding what it is and with one foot already out of the door. It's a sad state of affairs for our country that we look so cynically upon an institution that's primary function is to celebrate our love for each other. And of course, if you're part of the wealthy elite in this country, it's not quite the same for you. That the emotional and psychological damage that comes with breaking such a bond with another person can kind of be mitigated by the fact that you can rebound quite quickly socially and also materially. It won't take all of your wealth and completely destroy you, probably. If you're on the lower end of the social strata, however, divorce and the end of a marriage can just completely destroy you materially and emotionally. You're left with huge amounts of emotional and psychological baggage, and you also no longer have a home, or the home that you spent your life building is taken away from you. But this is obviously with the caveat that the rich won't escape the emotional and psychological side of that equation, even if they think that they might be okay socially and in wealth terms. The scar that will come as a result of that division of the marriage and the breaking down of the bond of someone who was very close to you and the ripping of it apart, it's not something that will be positive or something that will be easy to go through. It will be extremely difficult, and it will be a point of trauma, and it will leave a long effect way into your life. And I mention the elites because it's relevant to the discussion about marriage, because in times in the British past, the elite understood that they needed to set a good example to the people at large. And so the institution of marriage was protected in law and promoted by them. They would set a good example for the others around them. But now we have moved into a culture where the rich no longer care for the example they set to wider society at large. And they don't care if people who are poorer and more unable to deal with the material ravages of divorce have to go through that. And so the financial elites and, well, the wealthy elites and elites in general are just getting divorced at increasing rates and don't seem to care about the example that they set to others. And I don't think this is what we want. We want this to be a reverse. We want to go back to having leaders and notable people in our society who promote the idea of marriage and promote stability. And this is because obviously it's a huge issue for our society and it has massive implications. Because if marriage is the union of a man and a wife and a family is the building block of a society, if it becomes soluble and no longer looked upon with any kind of veneration or sanctity, then your society is quickly going to fall apart because you're undermining your society from the bottom. We'll become a nation that is less strong, less stable, and a place in which it is more difficult to trust people. And so if you have any aspirations to live in a well-ordered nation, or for your children to inherit that nation and to also live somewhere that is well-run and well-ordered, surely it is an absolutely pivotal issue for you to think about and to have some level of concern towards. After all, the collapse of marriage can make life, which is already difficult, unnecessarily brutal for people who naturally long for a fulfilling and deep bond with another person. And so there is a rather heavy cost for treating marriage as though it is just this dissoluble contract in which the vows that were made on a wedding day can just be rowed back on at any moment's notice. After all, people vow on their wedding days quite often to love in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, in richer and in poorer. And so by breaking that and those vows, you're effectively stating in public that your word doesn't mean anything. So how can anybody trust you going forward? So those vows suggest a lifelong duty to another person. They're a huge commitment to make, and they also express a duty of care for that other person that you make those vows to. And I think part of what the problem is that the way that the culture at large views love is contrary to those vows, and it just hasn't sunk in yet to the wider culture that having an individualistic framework of love in which the individual just gets to choose whatever they want runs contrary to the idea of loving another person in a self-sacrificial way and having a duty to another person's well-being. And that's kind of what the problem is. It's an inversion of what love really is, and it perfectly sums up the confusion that people have about marriage and the state that this country is in. What people seem to think that love is the intense desire that they feel initially for a person at the beginning of their relationship, and that once this has died down, that means that the person should leave and seek pastures new. And the vows that they make in the wedding are contrary to this, and so they don't really understand what they are making vows towards. This perception of love, though, is a shallow one, and it would be better conceived of in another way, which has kind of been hidden from us in the last 40 or 50 years or so in this country. It is better conceived as a self-sacrificial role in which you give yourself fully in both body and mind to the other person for life. And what this means is that you should strive for the rest of your life to forego your self-desires, your kind of egotistical, self-centered desires for things and other people, to sacrifice yourself for this bond of the marriage, which is a union between you and your spouse. What that should do is create a bond with your spouse that transcends most things in this life, and that gives you just an incredible reservoir of spiritual and emotional support to draw upon in a difficult world. And what is more, if you know that the other person is also moving towards this aim as well, then you can trust the other person, and then you can build not just your emotional and spiritual characters together, but you can also share materially, confident in the idea that this area of your life won't spring any unnecessary surprises, because the other person isn't going to just leave you at any point in time. They've committed to you for life, and that means lifelong stability. And what this should mean is that you will love the other person so much because you're the only person in this world that really knows them, that the bond that you have between each other will be unbreakable. So what is the solution to Britain's very real problem of climbing rates of lack of marriage and divorce? The government is constantly trying to make divorce easier, and the cultural shift anyway is towards supporting this idea that divorce should be made easier and easier and easier. So I wouldn't look there, if I were you, for any hope in the short term for rebuilding marriage as a necessity for our society to replicate itself. There is a voluntary solution, though, and that voluntary solution is you and the way that you look at the world and the way that you value marriage. If you will find somebody who views marriage in the same way that you do, and you will commit to that person, even though divorce is allowed in by government and in society, you will both just ignore it and engage in a marriage that acts as though divorce isn't legal. But first, what you would have to do is find somebody who thinks like that, and then you would have to date them for a significant period of time to get to know them and to make sure that you can trust that other person and that they are a good match for you and that there is romantic attraction there. And this would also extend to, you should not engage in the full embrace and the full giving of yourself physically to that person before you are married and before you can be sure that this person is fully committed to you, because otherwise there is emotional and physical embarrassments and, well, emotional and physical ailments that can come from giving yourself physically in the act of love to the wrong person, somebody who is a trickster. If you do it successfully, this relationship will be the rock that you can build your family and your home upon. The stability and the constant having of somebody around you will free you from the mental burden of social isolation and a lack of stability in human relations. This will give you a better chance of living a basically decent and successful life, because you'll have a more stable home environment and a supportive environment in which to kind of deal with things that life throws at you. You won't be alone and have to suffer through them alone without any help. But again, the emphasis has to be on dating your potential spouse and making sure you don't rush into a marriage or rush into any kind of action that hazards you, either emotionally or physically. You should get to know the person over time and build the beginnings of what will become a relationship by really getting to know the other person, by showing an interest in them and asking them questions and getting to know their life and who they are. You want to protect yourself and avoid having to deal with the emotional and physical blowout that can come with choosing the wrong person to engage in, especially the physical act with before marriage. You shouldn't be doing that for that reason. Of course, for those who don't figure this out, which is going to be the bulk of the British population, what awaits them is a life of instability and mental suffering as they go through a series of broken relationships that rob them of their material and spiritual stability. Of course, this would be different, and the only way to bring a change about on a national scale would be if the elites who really rule the society by demonstrating their behavior to us and by influencing the upper levels of the social strata, if they would change their behavior and go back to being the good shepherds who demonstrate how to live by engaging in lifelong marriages, they would then also have the environment within which to raise their own children, and they would, at the same time, demonstrate to people on the lower social strata what is high status and what is to be aimed towards. There would probably also need to be some sort of change in the educational system whereby the idea of family was at least looked upon positively, if not actively promoted as something positive. And what all of this might do is it might inspire young Britons to see marriage as something that is noble and something that is worthwhile to seek. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get to a position where that happens at the higher echelon of British society. So I think for now, our only solution is the voluntary option, which is to strive as individuals, if it is our calling, to find a spouse and engage in the vetting process of a spouse, and then eventually to engage in a marriage that will hopefully provide us with lifelong subsistence. And of course, it's not all going to be roses. That's the point of marriage. It's a challenge. It's a heroic challenge to rise to and to overcome your selfishness, to give yourself to another person, and to look to them, to cultivate a relationship in which you love them fully. That's what makes it heroic and worthwhile. To build something great cannot be easy. And we only get one life, but a life shared in its entirety with another person, rather than shared in blocks with separate people, is surely one that is more wholesome for ourselves, because we will have one person who knows everything we've ever been through, and we will know everything they've ever been through, and the bond that we will share together will be magnificent and will transcend all other bonds that we have for anyone else. Imagine the experiences and the knowledge of each other that you could gain in that lifetime, and the bond that you could build. It is effectively to know them fully and to commit to them fully, and that is what love really is. So I think that at the end of this episode, it feels like a good time for me to just ask you, what is it that you want from life? What is it that you really want? Where are you going with your life? And are you up for this noble challenge that I've just presented before you? Many of your ancestors managed to do it. All of your ancestors managed to do it. That's why you're here now. So who are you to say that they were wrong, or who are you to choose a different path? If they've done it, why shouldn't you? Why can't you follow in their footsteps and choose the heroic journey? Why not follow their wise footsteps and honor their memory by choosing this heroic self-sacrifice and building a marriage bond with someone that is stable enough to raise children in this culture, so that you can pass on to the next generations and continue our civilization. In doing so, you would be contributing to our nation's storied history and contributing to the next generation by having a stake in our society's future and laying the groundwork for the next generation.